We're live. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Senate Education. It's Tuesday, March 23rd at 1:34 p.m. Senators, just to give a quick overview of what today and the week ahead looks like, we have two amendments that we're going to consider, one related to S-100, the Universal School Meals Bill. We do not have possession of that bill anymore, but I have spoken with the chair of Senate Ag, who also serves on appropriations. He is willing to co-sponsor it. Anyone else who is interested in sponsoring it, please feel free to do so. And Jim, we'll have a conversation in a minute about that, how best to proceed. S-13 is, even though we don't have possession of it, it is our bill. And senators may recall from Friday, we did have a request from the independent school community to play a role in those discussions as it relates to weighting. We then are now starting the next part of our work this session, where we have taken in two House bills. Today, we're going to be hearing from Representative James on for an introduction, and then Jim DeMarais will take us through a pilot program that has passed the House. And then tomorrow, we're going to look a little bit at a bill related to public school facilities in the state. And that will be paired up with an update from Dan Riley on school ventilation and air quality. Thursday, we are going to return to a subject that we started back a while ago, and that is civic education. And we are hearing from a number of individuals, including some local teachers and students on that issue. And the agency, as you may recall, will be coming back to us with a report, if you will, as it relates to what's happening right now in our schools and what they believe might need to happen going forward as we talk about educating for democracy. And then, is there any role for Senate education in this work? So that is just an overview. As you may recall, I have asked senators to be thinking about priorities that they want to accomplish in this second half. And we can talk a little bit more about those toward the end of the meeting. But with that, Mr. DeMarais, we could kick it off with you and take a look at S-100 amendment. This is, just so you know, Jim, going to be co-sponsored by Senator Starr. And this is relating to the universal school breakfast and lunch for all public school students. It also has the incentives for schools to buy locally from farms. I think Democrats who are just in caucus and others, I think the question around all this is funding, and this will continue to be the question. How do we fund this? How do we do and possibly implement a bill that is, I think many of us would agree, if possible, would make a big difference in the lives of students, but also an economic development bill from my perspective as it relates to small farms and agriculture. So Jim, if you wouldn't mind, I guess my first question is, since we don't have jurisdiction, the committee will not need to take a vote. This would be a floor vote. We could bring it to appropriations, but I believe appropriations has no longer has it. So the question is, where do we bring it? Do we bring it to ag, or do we just bring it to the floor?
So this is your individual amendment.
This is my individual amendment that will go, Senator Starr and I will be the co-sponsor.
Okay. Yeah, so I think your option is a floor amendment on this one. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to just take the committee through it one more time, just as a reminder? Committee members will remember that these are recommendations that came from the Agency of Education. Their request, Senate Agriculture has looked at this. They spent some time this morning. I don't know if you were there, Jim, but no. I was given the thumbs up that they're in agreement with making these changes, and having Senator Starr and my name, as well as anybody else interested, hopefully will give the nod to colleagues that we're all in agreement, and hopefully the bill can be amended as read. So with that, Mr. DeMarais, please.
Okay, sure. Oh, Jane, can you let me share the screen? Great, thank you. S100. Okay, so for the record, Jim Dameroy, Let's Console. We're looking at draft 1.1, Senator Campion's and to be Sarah's amendment to S100. It replaces section 4. So already in the language coming out of Senate Agriculture was a section 4. So there have been some changes to it, but the language is already in the bill passed agriculture.
Jim, we're
I'll
losing
point
you a
out the
little.
changes in this amendment as we.
Oh,
sorry. I'll point out the changes in this amendment as we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this, remember, the purpose of this is to devise a way for the secretary to collect information on low-income households for the purpose of providing federal benefits, not just for free and reduced price lunches, but for a variety of programs like SNAP and things like that. So with the universal school meals, there won't be a need to fill out the forms that are in use now for free and reduced price lunches because universal school meals are universal. So this is the way in which the secretary is empowered to get equivalent information. So what it says is the secretary shall first define what student poverty means for the purposes of determining qualification for federal funds by local education agencies, which are SUs, school districts and schools, and for the purpose of determining student eligibility for various educational programs and benefits where economic need is a consideration, and collecting and reporting disaggregated and student level performance data as required. And then the secretary shall establish what student poverty data should be by agencies, which are supervisory unions, school districts, and schools, the means by which the data should be collected, and the frequency of the collection. And the secretary shall determine how this data will be reported to the Agency of Education by those groups and the frequency of reporting. And then lastly, it says that SUs, school districts, and schools shall collect data required and report this data to the agency as required. So that's what it says. The differences from the underlying bill is simply, for example, in A here on line 9, determining qualification for federal funds by, it used to say, I believe, school districts, but now it's been extended out to SUs, school districts, and schools. So you'll see that construction throughout this. So it's been expanded to include those other two entities. And then B and C are new as well from the underlying bill, determining student eligibility and collecting and reporting disaggregated data. So those are the changes from what's in the underlying bill. The rest of it's pretty much the same.
Great.
Let me take this off.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Questions or concerns? This is, again, the language recommended by the agency. Senator Hooker, please.
So this goes to the issue that we've talked about being able to draw down as many federal funds as possible. Is that?
Yes.
Doing okay.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really address the concerns that some of the school districts have had about funding, coming.
No, it doesn't.
From the general fund. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Other questions, concerns? Okay, how about just a straw poll of support, just in case this, I don't suspect any concerns on the floor, but maybe the way to ask it, does anyone against this language? Okay, seeing none, terrific. So Mr. Demeray, again, if you would just loop back to Senator Starr, feel free to do it electronically and copy me, and we can put our names on it. I believe they also did a straw poll this morning, and we'll be ready to go on the floor. Thank you.
Yep.
Shifting to S13, senators, this is the weighting implementation plan, which is on the floor tomorrow. As senators may recall, on Friday, the independent school folks wanted to be consulted and would like that in statute. I think generally we agreed with that. Jim, is there anything you want to say? I don't even remember. I think this is new language to actually be in front of us. So would you mind just pulling this up as well?
Yeah, it's very simple.
Yeah.
It is here. Okay, so again, for the record, Jim Damer, Let's Council, walking through draft 1.1 of Senator Campion's proposed amendment to S13. So already in the S13, there's a requirement for the task force to collaborate with the Ds. All we're doing here is we're adding in the Vermont Independent Schools Association. So we're just adding that one other advocate into this list.
Great. Since we are amending our work on this, I would entertain a motion to do so.
So moved.
So moved by Senator Perchlik.
This would be a floor amendment too.
A floor amendment, correct. So we'll do it on the floor, but I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, we would want a committee vote on this.
You want at least a straw vote.
Yeah, thank you. So Senator Perchlik has moved the amendment. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor, if you would raise your hands. All opposed, so it carries 6-0-0. And I will plan to do this on the floor. Great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, moving on. We are now shifting to look at a House bill. I believe we have Representative James. Welcome to Senate Ed in with us, and Mr. Demeray. I've asked Representative James to give us that 30,000 foot overview of the bill, the genesis, a little bit about what the bill does, and then we will pick up with Mr. Demeray. So with that, Representative James.
Senator Campion, and thanks everyone for having me. I am going to start with a very brief story since Senator Campion asked me about the genesis of the bill. In the summer of 2019, prior to the pandemic, I traveled out to Denver to attend a national education policy conference. And as you do at conferences, I had the chance to, choose workshops that I wanted to attend. And so I spent an afternoon in a workshop on community schools. And being new to the legislature and, new to the education committee, I was really fascinated to learn about this model and to hear about all the really interesting and innovative community schools that were at work across the country. But the workshop focused on community schools that were in place in cities. And so when I returned to Vermont, I reached out to the Education Commission of the states and asked them if they could provide me with examples of early or innovative or current community schools in rural areas. And to my surprise, one of the examples they sent back was the Molly Stark School in Bennington, which is about 25 miles from where I live. So I went down to visit that fall and was very impressed with Molly Stark, which got its start as a true community school in the mid-1990s and achieved some really incredible results under the leadership of a pioneering principal there, Sue McGuire. And over the years, the Molly Stark model has changed and evolved, but it's nonetheless inspirational. And so I introduced a bill pre-pandemic that would start up some funding here in Vermont to get some community school pilot or demonstration grant programs going in our state. And so H106, I'm going to just give you the highlights from my admittedly very lengthy floor presentation from last week. So what I can tell you is that H106 would establish a 3-year demonstration grant program that uses federal stimulus funds. And with this money, I believe that probably 10, possibly up to 12 eligible school districts or supervisory unions would be able to design and implement a community schools model. Community schools are an evidence-based approach that is gaining momentum across the country. And community schools are not just a traditional school in a community or neighborhood. They have a very specific and research-driven definition, and in that definition lies the key to their success. There have been a number of studies conducted on community schools around the country, and these studies prove that community schools can improve attendance, they can improve academic performance, high school graduation rates, students' attitudes towards school. They can help close the achievement or opportunity gap for low-income students, special education students, BIPOC students, and English language learners. Students are more likely to progress from grade to grade and accumulate more credits. Discipline referrals drop, while a positive perception of the school among teachers, staff, and parents rise. The reason that I think the bill is really important now is that community schools tackle head-on the challenges that are intertwined with poverty. So this bill targets schools with a significant percentage of low-income students, and it helps them and their families to overcome the out-of-school barriers that hold them back and keep them from succeeding in school. So as our communities and our families are recovering from the pandemic, I feel like it's, we in the House Education Committee and now the House feel like it is time not just to recover, but to reinvent. So skipping ahead, community schools are, they're not a new model, but it's one that's gaining traction right now around the country. There are about 5,000 community schools across the country, and I've been able to identify maybe a dozen that are implementing all, most, or significant aspects of the model here in Vermont. The 4 pillars of the community school model are, sorry, I'm skipping around. 1, integrated student supports. And this means meaningful partnerships with social and health service agencies that bring resources right into the building or help families easily access these services to break down out-of-school barriers to learning. So Pillar 1, integrated student supports, could include, for example, physical and mental health care, nutrition support, housing assistance, or other wraparound services. Pillar number 2 is expanded learning time and opportunities, and learning is the top priority here. So we're talking about programs that include academic after-school, weekend, or summer programs that emphasize real-world learning and community connections. Pillar 3 is family and community engagement. So we're talking here about programs that bring parents and other community members into the school as partners, true partners, with shared decision-making and meaningful opportunities to connect with their own child's education, but also their own support. So the school becomes a hub where families are provided with services that they say they want and need. So we're talking about things like GED classes, financial literacy classes, nutrition, computer skills, substance misuse education, and more. And then the 4th pillar is collaborative leadership. And what's key here is the hiring of a community school coordinator who works with teams of people across the school, administrators, teachers, parents, community members, and community partners to put together an integrated and comprehensive approach. So those are the 4 pillars. What this bill does is provide, as I mentioned, 10 districts or SUs that basically win this grant with 110,000 per year to either hire or designate a community schools coordinator and roll out the model in their school over 3 years. It requires reporting every year from the eligible schools. It requires the AOE to report at year 1 and year 3. And again, the point here is to wind up, hopefully at the end of this program, with 10 really valuable, viable models from districts or SUs around the state that can provide other districts with the information they need to move forward with this promising model. So I think I'll wrap up there. Eligibility is determined by free and reduced lunch. 40% is the threshold. Or as you'll see when Jim walks you through the bill, we have some other ways that AOE can identify eligible schools as well.
Thank you, Representative James. Committee, questions? Senator Lyons.
Thank you. That was terrific. It sounds like a good bill. But you talked about the benefit to schools with high ELL needs. And so I'm thinking about, and as well, poverty, of course, driving some of this. And then also a BIPOC community. So as you were thinking about this and thinking about having sort of the demonstration grants, and because I haven't read the bill yet, does the bill specifically target schools that have perhaps a higher proportion of BIPOC students or a higher proportion of ELL students and so on?
Thanks, Senator Lyons. That's a great question. And it's an area of the bill where I think the Senate could probably do some work.
Cool.
So I'll explain that in a minute. I'm looking through for the specific eligibility criteria. The eligibility criteria in order to apply that we have built into the bill right now are 40% free or reduced lunch. And that's kind of an interesting threshold because that includes, almost half of the schools in Vermont. So a lot of districts and SUs are going to be eligible through only that criteria. Then it includes schools that are targeted through the federal ESSA Act for comprehensive support or equity support, which is a definition I don't have handy right now, but there's that kind of vector too. So that throws out a pretty broad net. And as we were bringing this bill to the floor, we actually had an amendment that would delve a little bit deeper into how AOE would select and target eligible applicants, like how they would pick the winners, essentially, that we weren't able to bring because we had a little parliamentary glitch. It was an amendment from Rep. Rogers. And so I was in speaking to Senator Campion last night, I told him that we had an amendment specifically around this that we weren't able to bring. And so I think that's an area where the bill could really use some strengthening and some more work. We also had some practitioners, and this is really, this is so interesting to me. This topic I think is just fascinating because the Learning Policy Institute, which is the leading sort of think tank that does a lot of work around community schools, they lay out 4 pillars that define a community school model. And those are the 4 pillars I have in my bill. The NEA has 6 pillars, one of which is equity. And I was trying to bring forward a streamlined bill that was really based in every research study I could find. And so when I originally brought this bill, it was model legislation that came through the LPI. They have 4 pillars, but we took some testimony about additional pillars that revolve around equity. And that might be another area that you would want to take a look at.
Great. Senator Perchlik.
Thank you. Great to see you, Representative James, and our committee. Yeah, this seems like a good bill. I had the same kind of question as Senator Lyons about how you reach out, not just the BIOPOC or other groups that the schools represent, but some schools that just aren't very good at applying for grants. So maybe some wording about how AOE reaches out to them. I did a school grant program on my state job, and we found out that just all the schools that always get the money are the ones that even applied. So we had to find a way. How do you get to those people that don't even think about applying for grants, because they're the ones that kind of need it most some of the times. But you, with that second pillar you talked about, I think you called it out of school learning, but and mentioned after school. I wonder, because I'm on the after school task force and writing, we're finishing an after school report, and there's a bunch of work that the state and this committee has done is on summer programs and out of school learning. I just wondered if the committee heard from the after school folks and how this would overlap with the two programs that we have specific to after school already in the state.
Good question.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Perchlik. I reached out to Holly Morehouse.
Yeah.
Great. Of the After School Network, and she is very interested in the bill, and I won't speak to whether she's excited about it. I think she is, but we weren't able to get her in for testimony. And I also know that the that task force report is due mid-April. So, you know, once again, progress, not perfection. We couldn't get her in. We were running out of time with crossover. But I think we were well aware that integrating whatever we try to do here with the report from the after school task force is going to be a great idea.
Great.
And I wanted to respond to something else you said that has escaped me now. So if it comes to me, I will circle back around.
Getting schools to apply that don't apply.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. So I think that's the reason I when I was skipping around my way too long floor notes, I missed this point, and I kind of want to underscore it. Research shows that hiring a community schools coordinator is the key to making this program succeed. So I just hope as you start to consider the bill that point won't get lost, and I can bombard you with studies showing that. So I think that it's going to be really important for the AOE to make sure that districts who have low capacity, who are feeling overwhelmed by COVID, who are thinking, you know, oh my God, another program, really take a hard look at this, because the funding would specifically bring that capacity to their schools in the form of a community school coordinator. So, you know, this is not some unfunded mandate that falls on the back of an overworked principal or a social studies teacher who somebody says, here, can you do this in your spare time? This specifically brings to the school the person to do this work, and that's a research-driven approach.
So related to that a little bit, would you tell us if your school A in whatever district and you qualify and you get the $110,000, tell us what would happen in that school over 3 years. So
the first thing that would happen in the school is that you'd hire a community schools coordinator.
Right.
Who could be someone with, that's not a licensed educator. That could be a grant writer. Could be somebody with deep ties to the community or deep ties to, regional social service agencies.
Yep.
Second thing that person should do is work across the school and across the community to do a needs and assets map. So you want to reach out and survey parents. And I really hope you have Principal McGuire in, and she can talk to you about this. But the very first thing you should do is take a look at your school's needs, take a look at your family's needs, and take a look at all the assets that your community has to bear, and then develop a plan that brings those together. So if if you find that one of your key barriers to learning is food insecurity, how are you going to solve that?
Well, we just passed a universal school lunch program. That'll solve that.
For example.
Right.
Okay, so bad example. But so the first thing you're going to do is make a plan based on your community's needs and strengths and assets. And then you start rolling it out. And we did hear testimony that these take time to take root.
So for example, I'm thinking to Molly Stark, which is in my district, if they had a dental office really down there. I mean, and I don't know if it's still there, but at one point when Sue McGuire was in charge of this, in working on them becoming what they became, students could go for dental services, students could go, I suspect, for mental health, all sorts of things. So that 110,000 that we would be giving a school largely would cover this person that again would facilitate all of this. It's not as though you would be getting these services in the school always. You might be bringing them in, but that person would be coordinating. Is that safe to say? Like, okay, we're going to have a dentist come in on Friday because this is a big need for us. We're going to have somebody else come in. We're going to make sure that students have dinner, because we have identified that as a need. That is how you see it.
That's exactly
Great.
how I see it. And
Great.
Molly Stark would be an example of a school. I mean, I don't want to, hint around here, but Molly Stark has 100% free and reduced lunch.
Yeah.
And they have a very strong foundation in place to, build back better.
Yeah. One of the things, and I mentioned this to you when we spoke about it, that this committee has heard a lot about is trauma throughout the state. Students that have experienced trauma, students that where in different parts of the state, the mental health services aren't there. And so this would also, you're saying, this coordinator could come in and identify that as a need in some schools and make certain that, the dollars aren't there to hire a mental health professional, but that person would be making that connection, identifying it, and then reaching out to perhaps services locally, bringing somebody in. And if those services don't exist, they would, again, work with the school board, school district, et cetera, to sort of make sure that this is kind of front and center as a funding need, maybe.
That's correct. And the key is, I think, creativity. The key is innovation. The key is unique.
Yeah.
So these are not cookie cutter programs. And we also took testimony on sustained funding. And community schools can tap into or bring down several sources of federal title funding. A lot of community school coordinators spend a lot of time developing kind of a braided or blended funding stream. So, they'll work with Molly Stark being a great example. When Principal McGuire was there, she partnered with Sunrise Family Resource Center.
Mm-hmm.
They applied for and won a $300,000 community development block grant, and they built a wing onto the school to house social services. It was remarkable.
Yeah.
So you start looking for other sources of funding from everyone from the business community, in-kind donors, philanthropic or nonprofit partners, grants you can apply for, and these federal sources of funding as well. So that's something that the community school coordinator should be focusing on.
Great, very helpful, good. Final questions for Representative James before we move to Mr. Desmarais. All right, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Representative James. Mr. Desmarais, the floor is yours if you wouldn't mind taking us through the bill. I believe it's on our website already. Yep, so unless senators need to see it front and center, please have a look at our website. And Mr. Desmarais, the floor is yours. And you're muted, Jim, just so you know.
Senator Campion, do you mind if I stay to watch the walkthrough?
Nope, not at all.
Thanks.
Okay, let me find it. Here it is. Okay, so for the record, Jim Desmarais, Ledge Council, we're walking through what is draft 9.1 of H106, but it's also the pass version in the House. The official copy hasn't come out yet, but this is the same language. Sure. So this bill, Section 1 is a title, so it's called the Community Schools Act. Section 2 are the findings and purpose. And there are a number of findings here. I won't read them all. But it's talking about basically the benefit of having a community-based school approach, and talking about, for example, line 17, according to AOE, an average of 38% of students across all SUs during the 1920 school year qualified for free or reduced price lunch. So talking about the challenges that some students face. Talks about in 3, what community schools facilitate, which is the coordination of comprehensive programs and services, which are selected to meet the unique needs of students and families. And then talking about research on the 4 pillars of the community school approach, which we'll get into. But the 4 pillars are integrated school student supports, expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities, active family and community engagement, and collaborative leadership and practices. And then it shows that that these interventions, improvements, improve outcomes. And it's talking about the evidence-based approaches to this sort of support. And then it's talking about return on investment. So every dollar invested returns $7 in net benefits to the school. And talking about every dollar invested in programs to support can yield up to $15 in return. So some economics there. And then talking about that the establishing community schools is one of the 10 recommended strategies for restarting and rethinking the role of public education in the wake of COVID-19. Then talking about the fact that these schools have been established in many states, particularly in the cities, but the approach also has been successful in rural communities, and gives an example of that. And then goes on to the purpose. So purpose is to support a demonstration grant program for the implementation of community school programs that provide students with equitable access to a high quality education. Section 3 is the grant program itself. So we have some definitions. First definition is of the community school coordinator, who is really key to this whole bill. And that means a person who is a full-time or part-time staff member serving in an eligible school or in a school district or SU with an eligible school and appointed in accordance with Vermont law, and is responsible for the identification, implementation, and coordination of a community school program subject to the operational and reporting structure of the community school coordinator's employer.
Jim, may I pause there for just a minute?
Sure, yep.
Just a quick question, Mr. Emery. So are people required to hire somebody?
No.
No.
This is a grant program. So
Okay.
if they choose,
they may go through this without hiring a coordinator.
Sorry. If they are taking grant money, if they choose to take grant money, then they either have to hire a coordinator,
yes,
or they have to, there might be a district that already is working toward this goal, but it's not quite organized enough. So that if they're doing that, then they can elevate somebody to that position to help implement the program.
Thank you.
The definition of community school program goes into those 4 pillars we talked about. So it means a program offered at a public elementary or secondary school that includes all of the following, which are 4 things. First is integrated student supports, which address out of school barriers to learning through partnerships with social and health service agencies and providers coordinated by a community school coordinator, which may include access to services such as medical, dental, vision care, and mental health services, or access to counselors to assist with housing, transportation, nutrition, immigration, or criminal justice issues. Second, expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities, which may include before school, after school, weekend, and summer programs that provide additional academic instruction, individualized academic support, enrichment activities, and learning opportunities that emphasize real-world learning and community problem solving that may include art, music, drama, creative writing, hands-on experience with engineering or science, tutoring and homework help, and recreational programs that enhance and are consistent with the school's curriculum. Third pillar is active family and community engagement, which brings students, families, and the community into the school as partners in children's education. It makes the school a community hub, providing adults with a facility to access educational opportunities they want, which may include coordinating services with outside providers to offer English as a second language, classes, green card or citizenship preparation, computer skills, art, financial literacy, career counseling, job skills training, services for substance abuse, misuse, and other programs that bring community members into the building for meeting or events. And collaborative leadership and practices is the fourth pillar, which bring a culture of professional learning, collective trust, and shared responsibility using strategies that shall, at minimum, leverage the multi-tier system of supports and include a community school coordinator and a representative of families in the community, and may include school district, and other leadership or governance teams, teacher-learning communities, and other staff to manage multiple complex joint work of school and community organizations. So apologies for reading all that, but that is a really key part of this bill, these four pillars. So next, demonstration grant means a grant provided to an eligible applicant. Eligible applicant means a school district with an eligible school or SU with an eligible school. And definition of eligible school means a public elementary or secondary school that has a student body where at least 40% of students are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, or has been identified for comprehensive or equity support and intervention. So then we go into the authorization of the grant, subsection B. It says the secretary is authorized to provide annual demonstration grants of up to $110,000 a year for a period of 3 years for each eligible applicant. And that can be used for two things. First, to hire a community school coordinator to develop and implement a community school program, or designate a community school coordinator from existing personnel and augment work already being performed to develop and implement a community school program. C goes into the administration. So it'll be administered by the Secretary of Education, who shall develop the demonstration grant application, determine the grant amounts, and provide grant funding on or before September 1st, 2021, 22, and 23. Gives the ability of the secretary to deny or reduce second and third year grant funding if the applicant has made insufficient progress toward developing the program. And then requires the agency to inform SUs of the availability of these grants and provide technical assistance in applying for these grants. And then to advise applicants of other sources of funding that may be available. The use of the funding in D, one is to, as we talked about, to hire a community school coordinator or to designate a community school coordinator from existing personnel to augment work already being performed. And if the funding is used to hire a community school coordinator, then during the first year of the grant funding, that coordinator would conduct a needs and assets assessment of the school to determine what is necessary to develop a community school program and action plan. And during the second and third years would work toward overseeing the implementation of that plan. And then at the end of each year of grant funding, the applicant who received grant funding will undergo an evaluation designed by the Agency of Education. And then in December of 2022 and 24, the agency will report back to you and the governor on the impact of this program. And that would be made publicly available. Appropriations are 1.529 million to the AOE. And this is from the ESSER funds, ESSER 3 funds. And that's for the grant funding. And then for all 3 years, the grant funding. So one appropriation covers all 3 years. And then from that, the agency can set aside 1% for informational assistance and technical assistance, and 2% for evaluations. And the effective date is on passage.
Committee, questions? Senator Lyons and then Senator Perchlik, please.
I'll just going to the funding piece. Once these are dollars that are coming to us as a result of the pandemic alone, or are these ongoing? Yeah, totally. So after how many years will these funds disappear? Is it the 2023?
3 years.
So it's 3 years, and then suppose, and maybe this is a question that we would hear from testimony and possibly Representative James. Was there discussion about what happens when and if some foundational program is in place and requires additional funding? Then does that revert to the traditional funding process for schools? I mean, does it become part of the property tax process?
Yeah. So first I have to correct what I said. The bill says this, but it's wrong. Sorry, I apologize for this. The appropriation I said was 1.529 million, which is what the language says in the version I'm showing you. But I believe that was amended by appropriations. And so the as-passed version has a different number in it. And that number, Rep. James, is 3.5, I think.
Representative James, you want to weigh in on this?
Thanks, Senator Campion. As amended by appropes, it is 3.399 million of ESSER money.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's the only change appropriations had, I believe, on this bill.
Okay.
Which we don't have the final version yet from the House, so that's why we're showing you this other version, which is too bad. But in answer to your question, Senator Lyons, if schools want to continue with this after the 3 years, then the cost of that would be built into local budgets, unless you do something further at the state level.
Okay, but basically the funding would be to set up whatever structures or plans, curriculum, measurement would be needed to keep the community school going.
Correct. I mean, the community school coordinator position at the school is funded from this grant for 3 years, but that position would be funded from school budgets going forward after that.
All right.
So in some ways, I mean, I know that appropes is still thinking about taking some federal funds for universal school meals if they were to do it for 3 years, and then it again is picked up or it disappears. I think Senator Perchlik, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is really for AOE, and I was going to maybe asking Representative James, but maybe it makes sense just to wait that when AOE comes in, I can ask them.
Senator Hooker.
Thank you. And the bill suggests that the coordinator sort of do the survey and then implement the plan in the second and third year. Where does the money for implementation come from? And I know, Representative James, you talked about partnering with different groups and stuff. And I'm curious to know what you found out about how successful, obviously some of these schools have been around for a long time. They must be successful in forging those partnerships. But do you have any information about the percentage of these schools that succeed and don't have to just give up the plan after the initial investment?
Representative James?
Thanks, Senator Hooker. And I have a barking dog, so I apologize. One thing I wanted to point out about the funding is that this is presented very specifically as a 3-year demonstration grant program with the federal funding ending in 3 years. So ultimately, at the end, our product will be 10 examples from around the state in different settings with lessons learned. So at that point, if the schools that have participated want to continue the program, they would have had 3 years knowing that the grant program ends to try to build a sustainable funding model. So that's one thought about the funding. I have a significant amount of information from other states about all the different ways in which community schools models get started and how they sustain themselves. But I guess the best blanket answer to that question is to say that they are often started with seed money and they build from there depending on the partnerships that can be put in place and whatever costs the local school budget can or can't bear. So
it would be helpful if you could forward along to Jeannie Lowell at some point, if you have numbers that show, in I'd say as much as regional as you can, but we'll look at nationwide numbers. These schools started this after a 3-year period. This percentage continued. That would be really helpful to us.
Great. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get stats on this is how many people started it and X% of them succeeded or failed, because it's more organic than that.
Okay.
What I can provide is significant data sets on how community schools do. I have quite a bit of information on, for example, the ROI studies that I included in the findings. I only included, 2 of them. And I can send along information on funding.
Yeah,
as well.
I would just say, if you can take a look, because again, we don't want to start something that, evidence shows in 3 years, nobody's going to continue this.
Right.
I know that we're going to get some data, but, I think that would be really important information for us to have to move confidently, knowing that, half of them would continue, or 7/10 would continue, and that this would really make a difference. And if the evidence showed otherwise, we would want to know that to make sure that we can do this in a way that would make sure that they could continue, to be supportive, to be helpful, see what we might need to put in. Senator Hooker.
I just want to say that these are things that I think every school should have,
Yeah.
So it's like, how can we set these schools up and put them in place to succeed, and then spread out the lessons learned from them to other schools. But, it always comes down to a question of funding, and that's where we're at.
Other questions? Okay, well, we will be continuing on this conversation later this week. And tomorrow we will be hearing from other House members regarding the school construction bill, and they too have a literacy bill that they will be bringing in at some point. Let's take, before we jump into some school funding things, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back.